welcome as everyone's trickling in. We might just get started. Quick intro. We have three speakers today. Melissa at the top here from Lander and Rogers, Philip from Sentrian, and Josh here. My name's John, and Casey is here. We both work with Sentrian as well. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section at the top, and we'll go from there. But just really quickly, Melissa, I might start with you. If you want to just quickly introduce yourself and what you do. Hey there, Melissa. You might have to unmute yourself. Or...
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Apologies.
Well, sorry everyone. I'm just trying to join this thing. My headset's not working.
Yeah, the same. I had a headset issue.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
No, all good. Just a quick MO about yourself, Melissa.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. I'm a partner at Lennon Rogers, specializing in cyber and cyber insurance. I assist a lot of companies with incident response, but I also work with insurers to provide cyber coverage advice.
Right. Okay. And then Phil from Sentrian.
Yeah, hi, my name is Philip. I head up the client service delivery at Sentrian. Have been involved in internal security and our client security for our customers.
Perfect. And then last but not least, Josh.
Yes, hi everyone. My name's Josh Ryan. I'm a director of Befor Insurance Solutions. We're an insurance brokerage that's under the Invest Group, and I specialise in technology, cyber, and corporate risks.
Perfect. Okay, so that's why we're putting on today, to get a nice rounded perspective on this topic, which is really interesting, and I really want to hear some of these stories. So without further ado, let's go to the next one. Okay, so Phil, just what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep my part relatively quick. We have some really interesting content from Melissa and Josh, so and their respective industries. I just thought I'd give a bit of an overview of cyber. Cybersecurity probably isn't just a technical discipline. It's definitely no longer just an IT problem. It's a whole business. I think the interesting definition that I found, it's a practice of protecting people, systems, networks, and data from unauthorized access, damage, or attacks. This probably only works when people, processes, and technology operate together. If there's a weak link in that, an attacker can get foothold into an organization. And probably just it's about minimizing risk. So that's kind of the end game, is to stop threats like ransomware, phishing, zero-day attacks, insider risk, and probably increasingly the whole AI-powered attacks. So organizations need to protect their data, and it's about preserving reputation, keeping the lights on, and sort of just meeting that regulatory obligations that Melissa is going to talk about.
Yeah, so the most important thing here is the three prongs as well. So I think a lot of people talk about the tech too much, and then they talk as much about processes and people, which is probably like the key things, right?
Yeah, definitely. From our side as a managed service provider, cybersecurity is kind of a balancing act between a client's risk appetite, their budget, and any business constraints, and just trying to get that mix right with the client. So
yeah, okay. And obviously it's changed over the years. So obviously you're talking about AI a lot these days, which is really interesting. Some of these deep fakes are crazy, what I've seen. So if we just have to contextualize, maybe just to make sure that we're sort of in the present state, what did cybersecurity used to be like versus what is it like now?
Yeah, I guess historically it's been, quite reactive and perimeter focused. So people were looking, more at sort of traditional antivirus and firewalls. And once an attacker got into the network, they sort of pretty well had free run. Patch management was not really consistent. It was a lot more reactive. So long windows of exposure. Once someone got in, they sort of had, access. Visibility was really limited in the environment. So we just sort of had basic logging, and there was no real-time threat detection. So often, if someone got into the environment, they could be in there for weeks, months, which, we've seen in the past. incident response is something that was pretty ad hoc and really reactive. So there was no playbooks, there was no real structure to anything. It was more if something went wrong, people sort of scrambled to get it back under control. And kind of around security standards and frameworks, pretty well it was anyone that wanted to deal with government or defence was the people that had those kind of things in place. So probably if we fast forward to today, that has changed a lot. I think organisations are being a bit more proactive. We're looking at sort of multi-layered defence, things like application control, so network segmentation, EDR, SIEM, and that AI-driven analytics to sort of shut down any attacks early. So we're not relying on that human element to sort of capture any of those things. So it's a bit more proactive to try and minimize the damage. Vulnerability management is something that's turned automated, so continuous patching, real-time configuration checks. Remediation has sort of reduced those exposure windows, so that's something we're seeing. And I guess sort of that risk management is integrated into just the business, day-to-day business. So looking at suppliers and things like that is really important. And it's probably just security is not a bolt-on anymore. It's part of business governance around that compliance, procurement. It touches sort of operational business decision making, which is what we're seeing out there. Some of the other things we're seeing is people are a bit more organised when an incident does occur. So we're seeing clients with incident response plans and business continuity plans, so a lot more prepared. Those plans are tested, and we're also seeing clients start to adopt some of the frameworks like SMB 1001, Essential 8, and ISO. So we're seeing that maturity starting to happen with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, that's great. That ISO as well, very stringent, isn't it? The compliance for that, so very interesting. And the SMB is really taken off.
Yeah, it's been really good. So we've had, we can probably thank the insurers for a lot of that. So sort of driving some of those compliance and sort of pushing hard for those security controls. So. Yep.
Great. Okay, perfect. That's a good overview of kind of where we are. Now, I just thought it'd be interesting to see the interplay between all the players in the market. So obviously we have an IT MSP such as Sentrian. Most people have an IT department or a provider, whatever you want to call it. And then we also have the internal staff or the representatives, the insurers, which we have a representative today, and then also your legal representatives as well. So just really quickly, where is the ISP, Phil, while I got you, where are the boundaries there, where you would then pass it on to the insurer or say, hey, get legal advice or handle it to someone internally? Like, where exactly does the ISP fit in?
Yeah, I'll sort of take the MSP perspective. So from an insurance side, we are responsible for the systems and infrastructure that we manage, but it doesn't necessarily translate or extend into everything the client touches. So sort of things like data governance, any third-party apps that aren't in our control or any internal processes, that sort of remains the client's responsibility. Clients carry their own compliance obligations, such as notifiable data breach scheme and reporting, and in that they're need to look after their own cyber insurance for their own business risk. And I'll probably hand over to the other guys for their parts, because that's, we sort of control our underlying infrastructure and our business, but the clients are responsible for their own.
Yeah, ultimately. And so Josh, if you take it over there, like where's the crossover there between the IT MSP and legal and yourself?
Yeah, so I just thought I'd touch on, Phil, when you mentioned before having, business continuity plans and the like. One thing you mentioned about actually testing those is probably one of the most important things that we don't see happening very often. which is probably the most important, because it's all well and good to have a plan, but in reality, you know, cyber events are stressful, and you don't want to be trying to sort of fumble through paperwork that was written a year ago when you're trying to deal with a high stress environment. But yeah, and so from a responsibility perspective, we're an insurance broker. You know, we're often referred to as an insurance advisor these days, because we're more giving strategic advice. We're acting for our clients as their advocate, and we're responsible for, you know, implementing their insurance, managing their insurance requirements, understanding their exposures, collating relevant data to present to underwriters, structuring policies, recommending solutions. So it's quite a lengthy scope as to what we have to get involved with, or what we are involved with these days. But I think, you know, it's pivotal when working with an MSP, because we, you know, the MSP will understand their client quite significantly. We obviously understand the insurer and their claims process, so we just want to try and, I guess, jump on the matter as quickly as possible. You know, lodge the incident with the insurer as soon as we're aware of it. You know, ask the insurer to log it with the legal panel, like Mel from Landers. Just time is of the essence, and quite often, if you can get in quickly, it can avoid a lot of headaches down the track.
Can I just add to that before we get to you, Mel? I know we sometimes do some audits at Sentrian for insurance quotes as well. So in that sort of prelim phase, or if they're trying to get another quote. So there's a lot of natural crossover there. And on to you, Mel.
Yep.
You were nodding there when Josh was saying some things. So give us sort of
No,
like
absolutely.
how does
Yeah.
that work?
And just to clarify where the lawyer sits, and also to explain, I'm often the breach counsel, or the lawyer that's on the insurers panel as well, who is able to assist an organization when a cyber attack happens. But my role actually can extend even pre-loss, so even before the incident. And it has happened often with some insurers who have certain offerings, where they say, you know, before any incident happens, reach out to Mel, who is on our panel, who is your breach counsel. If anything happens, have a conversation with her, or maybe get her team to train you up, have a tabletop, have a discussion around your plans that you have in place, test them together, you know, test them together with legal counsel, test them together with, you know, any IT providers you prefer, you know, together with your MSP if they're there, if they're quite, they're part of the whole process, your third-party suppliers. Just, I think our role definitely, even though primarily I would say I come in once a cyber breach has happened, I definitely do assist a lot of these organizations who have cyber insurance pre-loss in order to get them set up, really. And through this whole process, I actually work very closely with both the insurers and, you know, someone like Josh as a broker, because it's quite important that I, as the breach counsel, also understand the insurance claim process, so that it assists the, you know, organization as well in you know, reporting to the insurer, keeping the broker involved, etc. So the role of a lawyer, I think, in cyber is definitely more than just purely legal advice, writing a report for you. It definitely is quite a proactive role, and I do, and I am there, you know, really to hold the hands of these organizations to assist them through both pre-loss and after the loss. So hopefully that puts it all in context.
That is great, actually. I think that's probably the best anyone's explained it. So it's great having you all three here. Perfect. So moving along, over to you again, Melissa. You've got a really good slide here about the landscape, which looks huge. Run me through this.
Great segue to explain to you, just, you know, please don't feel overwhelmed by this slide. The main point I want you to take away is cybersecurity law is difficult, it's hard, it's complex, it's messy. In Australia, it's all been quite haphazard in the way that it's all developed. And you've probably heard in the last couple of years, you know, since the large data breaches of Optus Medibank, the government has been trying to put in place even more reforms. So the reality is cybersecurity law and privacy law in Australia is messy. So, you know, and that's where I would say, and later I'll give you an actionable insight, which is lean on your breach counsel, lean on your lawyer or lean on, you know, people like Sentrian who provide these webinars for free, so that you can continually keep updated on the latest reforms. You don't have to know everything, and I will tell you next what are the key, you know, pieces of law or regulations that you should be aware of at least. But just know that it's complex, and you know, you actually have available legal counsel to help you if you do have an incident that you need to consider your obligations. But here is where I really want to come in quickly. I won't overwhelm everyone with what the law is, but I just want to bring to your attention certain things that you should keep, at the top of your mind, some things that you may not be aware of and you should know, and just some of the new reforms that have come into place, which you should know about and start considering how it can be implemented as part of your processes within your organization. So the first one is the notifiable data breaches scheme, which actually Phil mentioned earlier. It's not because every cyber incident has a personal information or privacy component to it, but it's one of the most common things in Australia. It's that when a business gets attacked, often their data is the first thing the threat actor goes after. And that's why I think it's so important to at least understand what the NDB scheme is about and whether it applies or not to you. I've listed there two Australian privacy principles that often comes up in the context of a cyber attack. The first one is about use or disclosure. The main point there is that the Privacy Act regulates when you can use or disclose personal information. So when a cyber attack occurs, it usually is a situation where there has been unauthorized use or unauthorized disclosure of the personal information. You can argue that it's actually the threat actor who, that took or took unauthorized use of the personal information. But as the organization, if you don't protect that information, often the regulator will be saying, then you allowed this disclosure, you allowed this unauthorized use. And that's why APP 11 is also important, because APP 11 at the moment is the key Australian privacy principle that is listed by the regulators as being breached in all of these huge data breaches that we see at the moment, because you actually have an obligation to ensure that you protect the personal information from misuse, from interference, from loss, from unauthorized access, from modification or disclosure. And these reasonable steps you need to take to secure the information is both technical and organizational. And that's why, to Phil's point earlier, it's really not just a technology aspect, it's also organizational, which means people and your processes. So the last point I just want to say about the NDB scheme is, yes, there is a threshold of $3 million and over for your annual turnover for it to generally apply to you. But please be aware that the moment you hold on to TFN information, you are caught within this NDB scheme. So you might be a small business, but if you hold TFN information of your employees and that has been breached, you then have obligations around the NDB scheme. So I know that there's a lot of talk often about, this NDB scheme doesn't apply to small businesses, but remember there's so many exceptions within these privacy laws that it may, capture you in certain situations. So it's just important to know when it applies and when it doesn't apply to you. So the next point then that I want to go on to are the laws that are less obvious but can catch you out. Two of them that I just want to bring quickly to your attention. With the recent reforms, there is this section called ATUA. It might not even come up in the newspapers. You might not have even heard of it. But actually what it is, it's part of the government's reforms to increase access to compensation by individuals. So in this situation, what the law has changed is that if the regulator says that an organization has breached a civil penalty provision, so meaning that you've resulted in an interference in privacy, then the regulator actually or the individual can go to court directly to try to get compensation orders. Before Section ATUA was in place, there was no such way. An individual could really only go to the regulator, to the OAIC, to make a complaint and try to get compensation that way. But now ATUA has opened another area for individuals to go directly to the federal court to try to get compensation. So it's something that I think a lot of organizations don't realize that came in the 2024 reforms. The other law that I just want to quickly talk about that might be less obvious is based on case law around payment redirection scams. So other than privacy breaches, the other big issue in Australia for cyber attacks is what we call business email compromise or payment redirection scam, where someone sends you an email pretending to be your supplier saying, please transfer $1 million to this account in payment of this invoice, but they gave you a different account number and you accidentally transfer it to the threat actor's account. Now, in this situation, we've got two case law in Australia that has clarified to some extent the position of who is liable. The resounding answer is it is the responsibility of that particular organization who could have called the other side to verify the account but didn't, and ends up sending the money to the threat actor, that organization is liable. Because what the courts say is that in this situation, you as the organization, you had it within your power to actually pick up the phone, call the other side, orally verify or verbally verify the account details before you make payment. You should really do that. And if you don't, then you should be liable for all the losses. So a lot of the pre-litigation work that I do at the moment involving these types of arguments around who is liable for, the amount of money that has been lost to the threat actor often, comes down to these general principles that has been explained by the court. So just something to be aware. Yeah.
That is really interesting because, and I just put in the Q&A, Carly Kine, the Privacy Commissioner, I follow her on LinkedIn, and she updates me when the Privacy Act updates, which is really, really interesting. So if you're not following her already, she's really good.
Absolutely. Carly Kine is actually really good with updating, sending quick updates to everyone and just.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what you need. Yeah.
And then the other thing was, we were at an EFT Shore event recently as well, and I had a speaker on stage talking exactly about that invoicing, that erroneous invoicing, and it was like $1 million payment. And there was a deep fake of someone pretending to be the CFO authorizing the release or something. It was crazy.
I know. We talk so much about ransomware, but to be honest, my day-to-day, it's more these types of payments. And the money that's lost is huge. I've got, a company that lost $4 million, a construction company. And it's one of those industries that you probably don't think about. They probably don't hold much personal information, but what they do have is they have lots of suppliers that they pay money to. So in that kind of industry, this is the type of attacks you're going to be seeing. So just a reminder that the key takeaway from this is remember your processes in your organization is so important about how payments are made. Please make sure that within your processes, you have the accounts payment person making oral or verbal verifications every single time before they click pay. So that's the one key takeaway. Yeah.
Mel, we've actually found that it's been very helpful for our clients to just do up a bit of a cheat sheet that the accounts team have on their desk, and
that's right.
Sort of prompts them to make a phone call, sign it off. In reality, a quick phone call is going to be so much easier than having to deal with a large loss that was paid to a different bank account.
Exactly. And just a reminder, the phone number should be a number that you already have or you can find quite clearly on a legitimate website. Yeah. Sometimes some of these emails put in the fake number as well. So just double check that as well. And the last thing I just want to quickly talk about are the newest laws. Just noting your time, I just don't want to go into too much detail, but there are three that I just want to bring to your attention. You've probably heard a lot about this mandatory ransomware payment reporting regime that has come in. It's now in effect. So it really applies to organizations with $3 million annual turnover and above. The idea is that they're trying to make this consistent with the Privacy Act. So yeah, to that extent, if you're a small business below $3 million turnover, you might not need to comply with this. But to be honest, the Department of Home Affairs, who is the regulator for this regime, does say we encourage voluntary notifications anyway, because this is a no fault, no liability notification regime. What the key reason for this regime is because the government just wants to gather intelligence around what is happening in Australia in terms of the ransomware or cyber extortion threats that are happening in Australia. Just a couple of things that I just want to bring to your attention. There's a lot about this regime that you need to know about, but these are just the key things I want to say. You only report if there has been a payment, right? You don't report if there's just been a demand. You don't need to. Secondly, it can be a demand for payment, for monetary payment, or it can be a gift. It can be non-monetary benefits as well. You need to report both monetary and non-monetary payments that you make. Thirdly, the timing. You need to report within 72 hours of you making a payment or you being aware that a payment has been made. So sometimes these payments often are actually not made by the organization itself. It's made by a broker that makes these payments on crypto on your behalf. So the moment you know that the payment has been made, 72 hours within that, you need to report on that. The last point I just want to raise is you do need to report certain things to the regulator, who's the Department of Home Affairs, about this. And this includes your communications with the threat actor about this ransom payment demand that you ultimately made. So just an FYI, be very careful in your negotiations. in the past, a lot of these negotiations are, to be honest, sometimes done by cowboys. Certain things are said which, borders on things that might breach the law, etc. But just now know that if you need to report your communications to the threat actor, just be aware of what you say in these communications, because it will be seen by the Department of Home Affairs. So these are just
Are you seeing these,
basically.
Melissa? Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you
sorry?
seeing them? Are you seeing many of these out there now being reported, or? Yeah.
Not many, and the actually Department of Home Affairs actually said there haven't been as many reports as they expected, to be honest, because the reality is not many organizations pay. I would say less than 5% of the organizations I've been assisting in the last 4 to 5 years have paid, to be honest. Most of them don't, and this I'll come to, which is something that I think both Phil and Josh will cover, which is the pre-planning work that you can do to reduce the requirements or need for you to make any of these payments. The last couple of sort of new laws that I just want to talk about is a lot of discussion around statutory tort for serious invasions of privacy. Again, this is just an expansion of an opportunity for individuals to go after organizations and seek compensation. But just a note, because it's a serious invasion of privacy, there's quite a high threshold you need to demonstrate in order to get compensation. It needs to be intentional or reckless. Then it must be quite serious in order for this to be used. So far, I've seen a couple of cases in court at the moment trying to use this new tort, but not in the situation of a cyber attack, but actually more in the situation of an invasion of privacy of an individual. So for example, it could be a journalist or media report, or an individual invading a person's space or personal space, for example. So I've seen a couple of cases at the moment talking about that. Hasn't gone to trial yet, so we don't know how it's going to play out, but I haven't seen it used in a cyber context yet, but I'm sure it will come. The last point is just be aware the civil penalty provisions under Privacy Act now has 3 different tiers. So what it means is that it's expanded the enforcement powers of the regulator. So in the past, the previous position is only if it's a serious invasion of privacy that they go after you. Now they can come after you even for very small administrative breach. And an example is if you do not have a privacy policy in place, they can come after you and issue you with a compliance notice or an infringement notice. So just an FYI.
Mel, do you see that as a bit of a segue for them to now start pointing the finger at directors and directors' responsibility?
Definitely, and a start for that. And actually, more to that point, ASIC is actually the one who is, I suppose, the bigger threat compared to the privacy regulator in terms of going after directors. Because ASIC has been saying, I am looking at a lot of organizations' cybersecurity frameworks. I'm looking at whether they've put in place reasonable cybersecurity frameworks. And I'm looking at whether the directors knew about this, whether the board actually thought about this. So actually the person that we should be more worried about is, or the regulator is ASIC. And definitely it's all going in that direction of expanding who they're looking at.
Yeah, I guess with those frameworks as well, if there's a framework there, then that is your reasonable attempt at securing that data. So it's probably a bit clearer now than it used to be.
That's right. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, thanks for that, Melissa. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, board directors.
Hopefully, it's not too overwhelming, and I've tried to summarize
really
them as much as possible. Yeah.
No, that's really good.
And the final part I just want to talk about is the AI sort of laws that's around it. So Australia at the moment hasn't had any mandatory laws around it. It's all voluntary at the moment, which is what we have here. They are what we call 10 voluntary guardrails. There is a cybersecurity element to it, which is a guardrail 3. It says that you just need to ensure you have cybersecurity measures in place to appropriately protect your AI system that you use. And this AI safety standards apply to both developers of AI as well as AI users and deployers, just like us. So in Australia, it's sort of still trying to work out, the government's still trying to work out which direction they're going. Just to give you by way of comparison, the EU has gone on the path of a more regulated regime for AI. So they're going down the path of mandatory rules around it, penalizing you if you don't comply, etc. The US, on the other hand, is on the other end of the spectrum, trying to deregulate, having as little laws as possible, as little rules as possible, with the idea being to encourage innovation. Now, Australia is sort of in between not quite sure where they're going to go. There was talk about having some mandatory safety standards, but it hasn't really come into play. So it's something to watch out for in 2026, I would say. But I suspect Australia likes to sort of toe the middle ground. It will have some aspects of what the EU has and also some aspects of deregulation to allow innovation. And that's where I suspect things will go.
Those standards have come from, yet again, another government department, isn't it? So it's not ASIC, it's not, ASD, it's the Department of Industry or something, isn't it?
That's right. Innovation. Yeah, that's right.
Innovation.
Again, that's why it adds to complexity, right? You have so many different departments dealing with AI, cyber, privacy, that it gets confusing for an organization. So, the whole point is attending webinars like this will help you in that education journey, hopefully.
Perfect. That's really interesting, actually. Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of work in AI as well. And I remember just going through HeyGen, the video simulation, you can basically digital twin of yourself. And I remember during the onboarding process, they were they had stipulations where you had to say, hey, I'm not impersonating somebody else. And there was a control in that onboarding process. So you couldn't make a deepfake of, somebody else, for example, and use it nefariously. So I found that kind of interesting, even though it was an American kind of company, there were certain provisions in there that you could tell that, if the laws change, they're sort of covering themselves that way. So
that's right.
There's probably also the ISO 42001 as well, 42001. That's sort of coming in, and we were talking to our ISO certifier, and he said it was really interesting putting a handful of certifiers in a room trying to interpret what it all means. He said it was everyone's sort of got a different interpretation of what some of those controls actually mean. So it's a bit of a watch this space, I think.
Absolutely.
So Mel, have we covered all three as well? Yep, perfect. Okay, so just moving along. Phil, over to you. I mean, ISO 4, which one is this? I only know 2001.
Yeah, so it's 42001, and it's around AI. So it's the AI policy that's I think it's just relatively new. So a bit of a watch this space.
Absolutely, and just to add in there, the OAIC privacy regulator also requires organizations to have an AI policy. It's not legally a requirement, but they do encourage you to have an AI policy as well that deals with how personal information is dealt with. So just an FYI.
Yeah, cool. This was just sort of a bit of an overview of sort of what we're sort of seeing. The Australian Cyber Threat Report is worth a look. That gives some really good insights into what has been reported to the government around the Signals Directorate, and a lot of that you can sort of see, and they break it up between government departments and businesses, and so that people element being exploited is really popular. So we've seen, as you highlighted, that phishing and the business email compromise is right up the top of the list. We're also seeing a bit of a shift in sort of that Gen AI by cyber criminals. They're able to dump like huge amounts of data, and what used to take them, weeks or months to sort of troll through and look at people's emails, they can now pinpoint those targets to go after, because they can, look at the payment cycles and filter on a certain dollar value, stuff like that. So that's really really interesting. As John had alluded to, some of the deep fake stuff is really scary.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example here of YouTube CFO. Someone created a deepfake out of the CFO of literally YouTube Global, which is, tens of billion dollars.
Good target audience if you're going to, everyone uses YouTube. So yeah, massive. I saw something the other day that, GPT is probably one of the, best spear phishing tools out there, because you can, find information that would have taken you a lot of time to troll a whole heap of sites about people. You can just get it all dumped. One of the other things is kind of that, I guess, if you look back in the past, if people set up their GPT personas, the spelling mistakes that we've seen, from, if you go way back to the, Nigerian prince email scams of the 1990s, it's we've come a long way since then. one of the other things we're seeing is that sort of, you know, say like phishing as a service, or some of these tools, you know, something like Bulletproof out there that has, you know, 300 ready-made templates. You know, it's a subscription model, so that, you know, pay per fish delivery, you know, so it's you know, that's global, and you can sort of put your regions in and target Australia or, you know, any other countries. So we're sort of seeing that, you know, really taking off.
So just to be clear, you can contract a business that does phishing for you as a criminal,
Yeah,
or
it's like a portal, so you can just, you know, you can log in and they, you know, pick what you want, and it's they've commercialized that that criminal element. So, and it's a massive industry.
And I just want to say one more thing. You know, ChatGPT, you said it's very lowering the barriers to entry to get that personal information and to then sort of spearhead your attack. If anyone has ChatGPT and they haven't unchecked the privacy settings, just go in and say, ChatGPT, what do you know about me? And this is in your own personal account, and the information you get back is actually pretty scary. So if any of you are listening and have an account, try that, because all that information is being logged into the database. So then when someone asks about you from afar, that's the kind of information that they're using, because you're a registered user.
Yeah, pretty scary stuff.
Okay, over to you, Josh. Tell us about the insurance environment. So we've covered sort of some of the IT threats out there that we should be aware of. What's happening in the insurance world?
Yeah, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible for you, because it is quite complex, similar to the legal environment as well. But yeah, so from I guess a higher level, the insurance industry sort of fluctuates between hard markets, soft markets, and like at a policy level, we're experiencing changes in insurer appetites and their policy terms and conditions. So like whilst we're still in a soft market to a degree, many insurers are starting to tighten their underwriting criteria to meet higher standards of security controls. So, you know, a lot of insurers are now wanting to see MFA, endpoint response, detection and response, encryption, and most importantly, cyber awareness training provided to staff. So what you were talking about, Phil, with deep fakes, I mean, some of the really advanced training providers out there will now give you images and videos that you have to watch to try and sort of differentiate between real and fake, and sort of encouraging staff to go through these to know what to look for. And then, yeah, so more recently, we've noticed insurers starting to include, you know, the new war and cyber exclusions, as well as biometric data or unlawful surveillance exclusions. And this shift is driven largely by by regulatory risk, privacy exposures, and litigation trends. So from a policy level as well, ransomware sublimits are starting to be placed on a lot of policies. Exclusions around that as well. Co-insurance conditions are being automatically added to a lot of new and existing policies. So we're starting to see insurers wanting to sort of reduce their risk and encourage clients to be more aware of these and put sort of measures in place. Just going back to what you said before, that's why I'm a big fan of ISO, because it sort of encourages clients to put in place policies, procedures, manuals, you know, contingency, and be more aware of what do we need to do to avoid these things, you know, rather than just solely relying upon an insurance policy. It's good to have an insurance policy, but it's still going to impact the business, impact the client's brand. And then, yeah, on a more positive note, cyber limits of liability, like higher limits, are now available. It's easier to get higher limits. It's becoming sort of more of a norm compared to before. There's now extensions for directors and officers liability for cyber-related incidents. And yeah, underwriters themselves are focusing on more value-add services like education, and then offering other complementary cyber advisory services such as, you know, incident response plan templates, real-time threat notifications, and sort of dark web monitoring, that sort of thing. Yeah, and then sort of I thought I'd just touch on some of the green flags that insurers are sort of wanting to look for. or are looking for when we present a client's risk. So a well-presented risk is paramount. So, when you're filling out an application form, including things like a capability statement, a corporate structure of the business financials, the terms and conditions that the customer is issuing to their clients, a clean claims history. So, by presenting a clean claims history, you're starting from a fresh slate. If a business has suffered an incident and it's quite small, sometimes, we look to maybe appoint the likes of Mel and self-manage certain risks to keep that history clear. They're looking for strong focuses on employee awareness and training. That's where sort of a lot of incidents are stemming from these days. Frequent multi-level data recovery and phishing-resistant MFA is becoming quite popular. They're starting to really favour businesses that use a managed service provider such as Sentrian or a managed security service provider. Just getting that extra level of advice and strategy from a professional that works in that industry and sort of deals with these things day to day, it makes a big difference. Businesses that align to different sort of certifications or frameworks such as SMB 1001, Essential 8, ISO, businesses that are certified or have aligned to those frameworks, and especially if those frameworks have been attested by a third party. A lot of these are self-attested, so if you can have them verified by a qualified professional, that sort of makes a big difference as well. And then lastly, strong contract management. So, really good terms and conditions that have been drafted by a solicitor that's aware of the most recent and current sort of legislative requirements, including the new war and cyber, provisions, making sure you've got really good limitations of liability, consequential loss exclusions, just sort of making it as robust as possible, without obviously being so risk adverse that it impacts the dealings with your customers. And then from a red flags perspective, things that insurers...
Just on that, Josh, we're seeing those forms when they're getting filled out are getting longer and longer with a lot more questions and a lot more detail being required. So it used to be a bit of a box ticking exercise, and now it's a box ticking plus a sentence or a paragraph explaining what's in place or what's not in place. So
yeah. It's actually I'll just touch on that separately because it's really interesting that you mentioned that. We, in the early days of cyber, we went through this process of proposal forms or application forms including 1,000 questions, and everyone would get frustrated because it's a long process, it's a lot of information, and then there was a bit of a trend that's starting to sort of progress to shorter forms, very little information required. I'm sort of, call me old school, but I still try and gather a lot of data and get all those original questions. I mean, it's all well and good to get a quick quote from a few questions, but in reality, I want to understand the risk. I want to make sure that the client's aware of what they can be doing or what they can implement to better their risk and better their presentation to the insurer. So I think a little bit of effort up front goes a long way in terms of their end result and claims management as well. So some of the red flags we see that, insurers are starting to sort of highlight are things like minimal information that's being presented. So just trying to sort of provide the bare minimum, not complete application forms in full. A lot of questions answered as don't know. It was once upon a time that was expected because no one knows, but now it's sort of, as claims are happening more frequently, the insurers want to see clients understanding them and trying to answer them. Trading without insurance, so being a vulnerable client to cyber attacks and sort of not having insurance for 10 years and then starting to look into it isn't a good look. Little to no risk management, including no future uplift plans. So, if there's if it's a business that's got a lot of personally identifiable information, or if it's a business that's at risk, insurers do like to see a plan in place. If your MSP has recommended these uplifts for a certain reason, they're not doing it to just earn more money. They're doing it because there's vulnerabilities there, and that's where an attack is likely to come through, and it's just going to help everyone in the long run. No risk improvements post loss. So if there's a breach that's occurred from a certain area of the business, if nothing has been done to future-proof that after the loss, it just sort of shows that there's a carelessness, I guess, thought behind it. There's no real urgency to avoid that happening again. Some of the other things are signing contracts without vetting the relevant clauses, acquiring businesses that have significantly less risk management or governance. So we're seeing a lot of M&A at the moment, and we've got a lot of larger multinationals that have very strict risk mitigation and management in place, but are acquiring a lot of small businesses that don't really have much at all. And what we're noticing is that there's can sometimes be a long transition between the smaller company adopts the technology and the risk of the larger company. So we try and understand that crossover and what that impact is going to look like. And then, high volumes of personally identifiable information. Holding 10 million bank statement records for a bank and having a 1 million limit of cover. You know that if there's something's going to go wrong, it's going to be quite significant, and sometimes that's where we need to start talking about the risk mitigation, but also pushing the levels of cover up to a satisfactory level as well.
Especially, sorry, Josh, especially if they can all now go to the court and see compensation, like we were saying before. It's a lot of risk.
Exactly right, and we're seeing some clients come through with 250,000 limit of cyber, and in this day and age, any business that's subject to the mandatory breach notification legislation, I wouldn't be looking at less than 2 to 3 million as a limit, just as a safeguard. I mean, obviously there's levels of severity that they apply for penalty, but if you're holding a lot of records, it won't take much to get to that level. And I think it's the last I heard, it was $70 to $80 per notification as an expense. So if you've got 20,000 records, it can add up quite quickly, and then there's the fines and penalties on top of that as well.
It could be business ending. Yeah,
definitely.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty scary, actually. So moving along, thanks for that, Josh. That's some really good information that you don't normally hear about insurers. So a bit of that inside scoop of when you're applying for insurance or renewing it. And Melissa, you had some really good stories. I mean, I really want to hear about your answer to some of the Qantas one where Salesforce was breached, where a third-party company was breached, and then by virtue, the customer records of another brand. But anyway, I know you've got 3 really good stories. So please run us through the first one. This one was really interesting.
Hopefully through the 3 stories I'm going to tell you, it sort of resonates with you, and it shows you the different types of attacks an organization may face and the different types of threats that they may face. So the first one I wanted to talk about is what I've mentioned briefly earlier, the payment redirection scams. And why I raise this is because whilst ransomware is a huge thing, and please don't get me wrong, it's serious, but payment redirection scams are actually top in Australia. It's, getting scammed is number 1 in Australia, and millions and billions of dollars get lost because of that. So if through the story I can show you what you can do to, perhaps improve, I think I've done my job. So the first story that I have it was this organization, it was a German company, and it had an Australian subsidiary here. It actually provided services to an American company overseas, and through that, it issued its invoice to the American company. Now, the American company was suffered a business email compromise and actually ended up paying the Australian subsidiary's invoice to the threat actor. So then we have this supplier of our insured saying that it was because of your compromise that caused them to send the money off to the wrong person. Regardless, we had to undertake obviously a forensic investigation. The initial suspicion was that the business email compromise occurred on the American company's inbox. But after subsequent investigations by us, it was discovered there was actually our insured whose inbox was completely compromised, which led to the threat actor issuing the invoice to the supplier and caused the payment redirection scam. All right, so that occurred, and we were in the face of, and I came on as a breach counsel, and I was trying to assist them in dealing with this demand that was made by the American company saying that the insured was at fault, etc. We're trying to deal with understanding as well if all the records in their inbox was breached potentially, and there's a privacy element to it. Now imagine we were in this emergency situation. The CEO whom I was dealing with day in, day out was completely across this issue, right? That they were suffering from this, business email compromise, trying to figure out what was happening. Within the span of 2 weeks, the same CEO unfortunately got scammed himself and then sent a salary payment that was supposed to be made to his employee to a threat actor. So literally within the space of during an incident response, the CEO did not learn from the lesson that something had happened, did not check with us whether or not it was legitimate, etc. Because it was quite easy to see from the email address, it was actually not a legitimate address. It was not the employee's email address. It was actually, some random name that you could have seen that was not legitimate. Anyway, so immediately we had to launch into assisting the organization with recovering the salary that was paid to the wrong person. But thankfully, because the CEO realized his mistake quite quickly, we managed to reach out to the banks, and the bank actually put a stop to the payment, and we were able to recover, the several thousands of dollars that was lost. Now, the problem here then is, even whilst the company was going through an incident response, they did not seem to understand the gravity of the situation and still did not have controls and processes in place. Even though we were there as legal counsel, we were there every single day chatting to them about it, they did not think of maybe perhaps checking with us as well whether or not this other email was legitimate. And instead, they again managed to be compromised a second time. Now, it's just a costly tale of human error. It could have been lots of money that's involved. It could have been way worse than what it was. I'm really glad that we managed to get some of the money back, at least for the second incident. The first incident, all the money was gone, and that was quite a lot of money.
Was it the same threat actors, or was it two different threat actors? Don't know.
We really don't know. But the reality was, through the forensic investigation, we realized that the systems have been compromised for quite a while now, and we suspect it was more than one threat actor group that has got in. So it was.
They're probably sharing that information.
Exactly. They could have, yeah. So it was really just a problem of not having proper technology in place, not having proper safeguards in place, and then in terms of processes, not actually even being cyber aware enough and understanding the threats enough, and just randomly, believing every email that they see, etc. Perhaps, my biggest advice here is really be a bit more pessimistic when you see emails these days. Just double check the email address, the sender email address, double check that everything's okay. And the second incident, it was an employee. He could have just called the employee and said, "Did you send me the change in account details for your salary?" That could have resolved the issue, but he did not. So really, cyber awareness training is so important here. It just requires you to just be aware of what you need to be looking out for and what kind of threat you are facing. So I've, it is not actually a special story. That I've just had many organizations where within the space of a short time suffered multiple compromises. And it all really comes down to two things: awareness and a lack of proper processes in place to make sure that they understand or look out for these threats. So this is the first story I just want to talk about. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to say? Okay.
Any Q&A? And I'll just check in the Q&A area. That was really interesting though, twice though. Like, wow.
And the scary thing, John, is that it happens very often. So that's why I thought it was a good one to raise awareness on. The second one is an issue of supply chain and your suppliers. And just remember that your supply chain is really only as strong as your weakest link. If you have really good cybersecurity in place, but your supplier doesn't, the threat actors can still get into your systems or compromise you somehow, or compromise your data through your supplier. So this was a situation of an organization who used a third-party supplier to manage some of their data. It was their billing system data. So you can imagine there's a lot of billing information and some personal information in there. Now, this third-party supplier uploaded all their information onto this cloud platform. Now, this folder, unfortunately, because of certain settings that were incorrect, became fully public to anyone who could just, you can actually go to Google, you just search this organization's name, it would actually list up this folder as one of the search results, and you can actually go in and look at all the information in there. And this occurred apparently when this incident came to us. This has occurred for 4 years. So you can imagine how much data, because as this supplier worked for this organization, they kept uploading information in that same folder, right? So not only did it have H data, it had data that was at least 10 years old in there as well, because they never deleted anything. They just kept adding in data into that folder, but never took anything out. And the worst thing was, this supplier, unfortunately, also did not have good processes in place. There was, through our data review, pornographic material within this folder as well. Now, that's not great, because if anyone looks at this folder that's publicly available, they would link those images to this organization. It was a matter of this organization actually becoming over-reliant on this one supplier. They didn't have any other suppliers on hand to manage their data. They only had that one. And there was a weakness in data governance. This organization actually didn't know what information their supplier had, really, and how they kept it, where they kept it, and how they secured it. And this is why it led to this issue of not only exposing the folder, but the employees of the supplier adding images that they should not have added into this folder. It was a costly mistake, because I can tell you the data review process for this was incredibly expensive. It required us to go through all that information because this organization also was critical infrastructure. So you can imagine the reporting requirements were more than just privacy related. So the key lesson learned here was, and we've helped this organization also undertake post-incident business risk analysis, and we've helped them with their risk assessment and providing recommendations with the assistance of their forensic person to the board about what they need to improve on. First issue was they needed supplier risk management in place. Second issue was they needed to diversify their suppliers. It was time to not just rely on one supplier, but actually, put it out to tender, have more than one supplier, just to keep that supplier honest, to be honest. And the last thing is actually improve their data governance. Know who holds your data, what types of data, and how they secure it. Not knowing all of that results in this organization, suffering when there is an inadvertent disclosure. Because remember, the obligations sit with this organization because it is their data. So again, a very costly mistake on top of the fact that it was not great in terms of the risk for this organization. Any other comments around this supply chain issue?
Any questions in the Q&A? Some people are still listening.
It's pretty scary stuff, I think, the whole supply chain. It's
and it's just so common amongst all industry, and all organizations.
As part of our ISO review, we sort of looked at all our suppliers and did a bit of a risk analysis on it, and it was really eye-opening.
Absolutely.
And you can see like large companies like Qantas get caught in Salesforce compromise.
Absolutely.
So like even enterprise sort of software deals that have very strict security provisions, you can't be guaranteed, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, that's it. Most businesses use suppliers these days. You have to, right? But I think to the point earlier that Josh also mentioned, make sure that your contracts that you have with them, have the adequate safeguards as well for your own business. The limitations of liability, making clear whose responsibility is when a privacy or data breach occurs or when a cyber attack occurs. Whose fault it is, where does the liability sit? I think if all of this can be addressed in the contracts as well, that will really assist in these situations. Now, the last story I want to talk about, which is not often talked about, is the insider threat issue. There's so much talk about these third-party or threat actors sitting in Russia or Eastern Europe, that are here to compromise our organizations. But the top threat that I also see a lot is insider threats. And the problem is these people are already in your system, so they can access a lot of this data. But it still is an unauthorized access if they use it or misuse that information. So this is a situation of a hospital. And we were called in to assist with the incident response because initially they found that there were a lot of logs of very sensitive health information being accessed by this, account of a staff member that wasn't actually the professional dealing with these patients or these other staff members within the hospital. We undertook a forensic analysis, and then we found that there was actually, it's not a threat actor from external. It's actually this particular staff doing it. So then it was uncovered that this particular staff member, for unknown reasons and still does not want to explain why, they decided to access a lot of these quite sensitive blood tests or medical examinations of certain patients and certain staff members of a particular profile. So it was discovered that it was male aged between, I think, between 15 to 35. It was very specific. And they all had certain medical conditions, some of them related to sensitive body parts. Very strange one, to be honest, one of the strangest incident response I've had to deal with. But, it was uncovered that actually the hospital, firstly, did not have proper processes in place to, I suppose, not surveillance, but supervise the proper use or access of my health records, proper access of these, examination results. Because yes, I get it. If you're a staff member within, you might need to access, certain patients' information, but it should always be your own patients or perhaps for an education purpose. Those were the only two legitimate users of the information. But this individual could not explain that they were all, because it was either legitimate because not all of them were his patients. Second was they were not all for education purpose as well. So it's unclear why he did what he did, but eventually, obviously, there was a disciplinary process and this individual was let go from the hospital. The main thing was this hospital realized they did not actually have proper processes in place, both for awareness training for their staff members as to what they can and cannot do, what is legitimate and what's not legitimate access, and also proactive supervision. A lot of it just was there was no supervision, in essence, of their staff members' access to information. It could have been way worse. It could have been this individual accessing sensitive information and selling that information. So again, this was a very important story that demonstrated that sometimes your biggest threats are your staff members or people within your organization who actually have access to your crown jewels and sensitive information. So you must also have processes in place to manage this insider threat issue.
Wow,
hopefully these stories
that was really interesting.
Give you a different angle to a lot of these stories we often hear in the media. It's really not always about threat actors.
No, I mean, internal employees as well. I know I was working with a firm. We had an incident where the head of cybersecurity, or the person, tasked with data governance, was then using it against employees to get their own way. So, yeah, sometimes it's very unexpected where some of these threats come from.
Absolutely. I also had an incident where it was an insider threat who was helping the threat actor overseas, getting all that information, getting all the keys into the system. So remember, it's not to say don't trust your employees, but have processes in place to make sure you can detect these issues when it does happen.
Okay, great. So that brings you to you, Phil. Thanks for those stories, Melissa. They are fascinating.
Yeah, they're okay.
No worries.
So yeah, like how do we prevent this from happening? We're probably seeing similar themes come into play here, like people's processes and training, and it's a constant thing. Is like the environment is constantly changing. But Phil, like you said here, like how do we optimize the situation within the business? What's your advice?
Yeah, I guess some of the things that we are really seeing, and I think it's shown today, is that user awareness training and phishing simulations, that kind of stuff. It's really it lifts the profile of cyber and just sort of keeps it in the foreground for people. So that's really good. The MFA and endpoint security and sort of safe links, that kind of that phishing resistant stuff is working really well. 365 backup application control, sort of just having a bit of control on what programs get installed. That there's that whole shadow IT risk is getting larger and larger, and then we're sort of seeing at that other end, sort of that managed SIEM and a bit more of a detect and response, sort of locking out of accounts. So, and then there's sort of the process side of it around the incident response. So it's kind of just balancing that. It's not about throwing a lot of money at every security product that's on the market. It's about balancing that with the business risk, and just trying to work with the organization around their security posture.
That's great. I know I got in trouble by you, Phil, for leaving a camera memory card on the table that we didn't secure. So I got in trouble for this stuff. So I know how easy it is to happen. Like just taking some pictures and then take the SD card off, and how small they are. And then it was good. They had a process in place that, like, at the end of the day, someone walks around and just checks everything's fine. And then, yeah, anyway, I got reprimanded. So happens to the best of us, right? Okay, just moving along. Back to you, Mel. What, from your perspective, if you want to see something like a company that had things really in order, what are we looking for?
Yeah, just briefly speaking here, this is the ecosystem map of the kind of support you get with cyber insurance, but also even if it's without cyber insurance, if you are prepared for it. So these are the key components that you should be thinking about in setting yourself up. You need someone who is there to tell you what to do right from the get-go. There's someone who is on your speed dial that you can call and say, what do I do? And that's the breach counsel or my role often. We have a hotline that a lot of organizations have saved, and it gets direct access to my team to tell you immediately what to do in the next steps. And then, of course, with cyber insurance, often I will then organize a lot of these other vendors that you might need in relation to your incident. Sometimes you might need a investigator, a forensic investigator come in. Sometimes if there's a ransom or threat actor involved, you need your cyber threat intelligence experts to come in. And then if there's data that's impacted, you sometimes need Equifax ID care. You also need, perhaps in a data breach, people who can review the data for you in a more cost-effective manner, and then for legal counsel to advise you on your obligations. And then, of course, if you need notifications to be made, often it's done by us with the assistance of a mailing house, for example. So they can then send these notifications out on your behalf. And then, of course, as part of this, you need to communicate sometimes to your stakeholders externally and internally. So this is where your PR or crisis comms people come in, and legal counsel often also assists in this process. And as I mentioned earlier, if there's ransom or ransom threat being made, you sometimes need ransom negotiators to come in, make the negotiations, and if you want to pay, they will undertake, these brokers will sometimes undertake the payment for you through crypto or whatever version of payment the threat actor asked for. And finally, where there's business interruption loss, it's often important to get involved forensic accountants who can then prepare the claim for you and submit it to your insurer to demonstrate this is the type of loss you've suffered as a result of this threat to your business. So that really is just gives you an overview of often the kind of people involved in a typical cyber incident.
Just really quickly, I love that, the
Yes.
PR one, because I remember there was a very large company, which I will not name, and they did a PR response, and then someone figured out that they'd used ChatGPT to cut and paste into the email response from one of the directors. It was in Aussie corporate, some of those funny meme sites, and they could tell by the way it was structured, like the layout and the M dashes and things like that. So
yeah, that's right.
Make sure there's a human doing that, not
absolutely. Make sure there's a human
PR.
doing it, and the best time to do it is actually before the incident happens. I say this so much that crisis communication is one of those things you actually should not be preparing for only when the cyber incident occurs. You often prepare for it. Of course, you can't have all templates set up with the exact wording ready for all the incidents. What I often say is prepare up to 70 to 80% with a template, and once the incident does actually occur and you need to use it, you have placeholders to fill in the next 30% or 20% in order to send it out. And it's so important because often you need board approval for a lot of these crisis communications. You need your legal counsel to approve it. You need many people to say okay before the communications can go out, and that can break down or delay the process if you don't prepare for it before the incident happens.
Yeah, and with these provisions as well, you've only got 72 hours. Is that notifiable data breach? Is that to your customers though, or is that to the authorities?
To the regulator.
Regulator. Okay, yeah. But either way, it has to happen
for the mandatory.
pretty quickly.
For the mandatory notification for ransomware payments, that's to the regulator. And for the notifier data breach, it's both to the regulator and your affected individuals. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, there you go. So yeah, you need to get your things in order very quickly then, if something like this does happen. And then so some insights here.
Yeah, just to leave everyone with something to take away, from today. We've talked about so much, but if there's anything you can start doing now, it's these 4 things. The first thing is just think about your proactive breach preparation, which means firstly, you need to know where is your data, what data you hold, what is the most important crown jewels you hold, and then start setting up a lot of these plans and procedures that Josh has mentioned about. It's often part of the ISO process anyway to get certified, but you need to have various plans, be it your playbook for if there's a ransomware attack, you need an incident response plan, who to call. This is often the biggest question that organizations forget. When I come into a tabletop exercise and I ask the board, do you know who you should call immediately? No one really knows which number. And so you need to, as an organization, decide who is the first person you should call. Is it your breach counsel? Is it, it could be someone external, your forensic investigator? Just make a decision of who you need to call and write it in the plan. And if you have a plan, don't just save it onto your laptop, print it out, because sometimes if your systems get compromised, you can't find a plan and you will not be able to get access to it quickly. So print it out, get someone to be a custodian of it, hold on to it, put it in the folder and have it ready. And also, of course, enlist the help of experts, like us, like Josh as the broker who can assist you with a lot of these proactive breach preparation. Second thing is then build a strong response team around you. And that often is part of the proactive breach preparation. When I say that, a strong response team, I mean, do you know who your breach counsel is? Do you know who are the forensic people you're going to go to? Do you know your broker that you're going to call? Do you know your insurer that you're going to call when you need to notify about these incidents? Just know who you need to reach out to and who is the response team who's going to be behind you to help you make these notifications and advise you on the obligations quickly. The third thing, and I think I've mentioned it before, because of how these laws and regulations for cyber and privacy are changing so quickly, know them, try to figure out what applies to you through, attending webinars like this, through continuous education outside, through your legal counsel, through attending other webinars everywhere else, because I think you can never say that you will know everything about this area. So continuous education is really quite important. And then figure out which parts of these pieces of new laws that you've learned actually applies to your organization. And the final bit is just a reminder, it's not just cyber attacks. It can also be non-malicious cyber incidents like IT outages. Say, for example, everyone uses Microsoft, but remember, a Microsoft bug or Microsoft update can cause crashes, can cause problems. Just think about the CrowdStrike issue. It impacted quite a lot of organizations globally as well. So just be prepared, not just for cyber attacks, but also some of these outages of the suppliers that you use. The more and more we aggregate and use common suppliers like Microsoft, CrowdStrike, AWS, the more concentrated the risk is. So be prepared about how you're going to deal with that and how you can potentially safeguard yourself or diversify when you actually need to. So hopefully these are quick insights you can take away with.
That was really good, actually. Yeah, just contingency planning, right? It's a basic concept, but you don't think, you rely on supplier and then everything's going to work. And then you're like, hey, you actually need 2 suppliers, like 2 different systems, or a backup to a backup. I know Phil was saying, backup processes, you actually need like multiple ones because, if they got compromised, for example, Google does your backups or whatever, and this does happen, you're not protected. You need to like duplicate it, right, Phil?
Yeah, and those the tabletop exercises are really important as well because that will highlight the gaps. So
that's right. It will highlight the gaps in your plans as well. Whether you actually live and breathe the plan that you've written, or it's just a piece of paper with a very nice diagram, but you actually don't operationalize it as an organization. So through all those tabletop exercises, we can assist you with understanding where the gaps are and where you need to improve on.
Right. Okay.
Just to follow on from what Mel was saying, then. And what I think everyone was touching on earlier with suppliers, a lot of businesses don't think about their supplier risk. I mean, I know firsthand, when Toll were hacked, we had a lot of clients that distributed product through Toll, and it put days and weeks on on their timeline and timeline management, because there wasn't any backups, or other providers were booked out or couldn't assist. So going through, who do we rely upon, whether it be a software provider, or like even Zero or Mile, or a physical provider such as transport or security, or what are our backups, and what are we going to do if we can't rely on them. But just a few things that can, best practice processes, going back to what I said before, implementing terms and conditions with your solicitor that are robust and are really, bolstering your position without scaring off your customers. Working with an MSP, I can't stress the importance of how beneficial it is to work with a company like Sentrian. In this day and age, with everything moving towards technology, AI, internet, there's so much more to learn. There's so much more to be on top of and across. It's just impossible for everyone these days to manage everything themselves. Find businesses like Sentrian, like Landers, that are experts that you can rely upon. That's what they do, and that's what they know. And if businesses focus on what they know and what they do, you can sort of work seamlessly together and not have to sort of try and be across everything. Work with an insurance advisor like myself, a bit of a shameless plug, but there's obviously a very diverse skill set and range of insurance brokers. An industry survey recently showed that cyber was one of the products that most brokers are asking for training on. It's one thing to know how to get a quote and place cyber insurance, but the intricacies of IT and cyber, there's a lot to learn there, and then a lot of that only comes from experience and having sort of managed those claims and scenarios before. Presenting to insurers, like working out how to improve your presentation, ensuring the presentation includes as much information as possible, and talking to your advisor openly. What are things we could do to improve our risk, or what are some of the red flags our insurers have highlighted that we should try and look at improving now for next year's renewal. And then finally, don't become complacent. So especially with how I operate, consistency is a big thing. If your presentation to an underwriter year one is 100%, and you've given a lot of documents and a lot of data, and then the next year there's an email with 3 lines and that's it. Even a drop in presentation consistency, the insurers can see, maybe they've got a lot on, maybe they're, very busy and can't sort of handle everything at the moment. So there might be risks or gaps that sort of start to arise within their cyber or IT environment. So those are probably the biggest ones from an insurance perspective.
Thanks for that, Josh. That was really good. Okay, just really quickly, I'm conscious of time here, but this is a question that I asked a lot of people, and very interesting answers. Like, what is uncommon knowledge in this area that people should be aware of? I'll let you go first, Melissa.
So I think that there are 2 that I wanted to raise, really. The first one is people often think just paying the ransom payment, all troubles will go away. Unfortunately not. Instead, a lot of what we've been talking about today is a lot of that proactive breach preparation, so you don't have to make the payment and still be able to recover. So that's one that I want to talk about. The second thing is, really, I think cybersecurity, it's more than just about technology. It's really about your people, right? People, and then the processes as well. Because there's a human element of cybersecurity that's most important. Very often, a lot of these incidents that we deal with happen simply because the human made an error and the human clicked on the link, or the human did not look clearly at the email address. The human did not pick up the phone to orally verify. it always often comes down to the human. It's not so much the technology failing, because a lot of the technology that we have at the moment are actually pretty good. As an organization, they're getting more and more affordable as well. So as an organization, if you have very basic, essential aid like MFA in place, for example, it does, and firewalls, it does push out a lot of these threats. But however, what allows these threats to come in is actually often the humans. So what I would say is, rather than focusing on investing lots of money and, buying the latest technology, etc., you should be focusing on your people and their awareness around cyber and how they can be your best defense to any of these threats being able to enter into your system.
From an insurance standpoint, I think one of the most sort of uncommon knowledge trends is that a lot of clients that we talk to think that, if you're not a large company, you can't be hacked. A lot of the media stories are around the large organizations because that's newsworthy. If there's 1,000 cyber attacks a day, they can't report on all of them, and there's not a lot of hype around the small ones. So just because a business isn't, large, or, the story might not be newsworthy, doesn't mean it's not happening to small businesses. And then just a few other tips. There's from a broker standpoint, even though every broker has access to cyber, there is a lot of difference between knowledge and understanding of cyber risks and cyber risk management. And then from a premium perspective, savings can come from implementing regular employee training, extensive data backups with multiple redundancies, and also implementing MFA, particularly phishing-resistant MFA, across all endpoints.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's really good advice. And finally, Phil?
Yeah, conscious of time. Probably one of the big things for us is Microsoft and Google don't sort of guarantee the backup of your data. So I recommend getting a third-party backup of your data that is in the cloud. The shadow IT and shadow AI is just out of control at the moment. People, we are seeing people cut and paste corporate data into a GPT without any sort of, any of those guardrails that you've mentioned earlier in place. So just to be really, really conscious of where your data is going, and, look at some data loss prevention controls that are in place or could be put in place to sort of capture where that data is going. Third, it's kind of around the vulnerabilities. We're seeing vulnerabilities there. One estimate is saying they're on track to do 50,000 CVEs, which is the vulnerability, and that's about 130 a day. So that's that graph there. You can sort of see it just going, and that with that, the rate of vulnerabilities that are being exploited. So some estimates are saying up to 30% of those vulnerabilities are exploited within 24 hours of being released. So that sort of back to that global mentality, so things that the networks that the cyber criminals are using to share that information is really complicated and large. And then probably the large one is that as I touched on earlier, which is that ransomware kits, phishing kits, that sort of full service offering. It's estimated around 23 billion, and it's growing 12% year on year. So, I think everyone would be happy with that.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it? Okay, well, wanted to end on a positive note here. So, obviously, we've got three experts here talking about the same topic, but support is here for you if you need it. Melissa, thank you very much for speaking today. I think the stories were really good.
Really good.
And you've got sort of your secure hotline here and pre-incident preparation services, so being proactive.
That's right.
Perfect. So that is the 24/7 emergency hotline there, if you want to save that one, and the cyber incident response team. So that's the Landers email address as well. So get onto them if anything that happens to you.
That's right.
Perfect. Okay, and then thank you again, Josh here. So obviously, if you need some advice around insurance and risk advisory, his details right there, 0732620048, and then Josh's email address is there as well. And yeah, over to you, Josh. Sorry.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you, and it's really good. And obviously, you got lots of insurance products there as well. Nice little list there, shopping list. If anybody needs them, really important. And yeah, thank you again, Phil, from giving an IT MSP perspective as well. That's our hotline, and care at Sentrian. You can reach us for inquiries as well. And obviously, we work very closely with some of our suppliers that you're hearing from today. So thank you very much for your time. I know we went a tiny bit over than expected, but thanks again for our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. And
Thank
we'll leave
you.
it there. Thank you.